my first question is, when it came time to create this film, where did the idea come from? Where did you start off?
I started off many years ago. Well, it started off with this story that I was growing up with in Victoria, where there was this famous case of a boy who just disappeared. And every year on the birthday, there'd be these news stories like what might have happened to him, and knowing that the parents are still looking for him to this day. And then that intersected with a story that I became aware of about 15 years ago of a possible pedophile ring in Cornwall, Ontario. And it was the subject of the most expensive public inquiry in Ontario's history as to whether or not these allegations were true. Like there were a number of victims who came together and said that over many years, all the most senior and trusted figures in the community, from judges and senior politicians, members of the clergy, like they were all involved in this child trading scandal, and it was so unimaginable. And after all this inquiry, there wasn't really any resolution. The presiding justice never said that this didn't happen, but said that it was all clouded in mystery, and the feeling of creepiness and the feeling of just the enduring effect of that was the genesis of this script, and of course I didn't base it literally on these two events, but they then, from that world, and the idea of how the tentacles of this kind of go into places that are unexpected, and the feeling of how far is the reach of this ring, what's the nature of the ring, and also how it affects these six characters, these three couples, parents whose child has been abducted, who don't have any answers, detectives who are involved in the case who are also overwhelmed and but form a relationship while they're looking for this child, and then of course most troublingly the nature of the captor and the child who's now a young adult, and how they negotiate their lives, and so that these things begin to emerge, and it's the characters that become clear. Once I kind of detach myself from the actual factual inspiration, I began to really focus on these characters.
Well, I mean, to me it feels very mythological the way you've approached it, and I really love the fact that to me it's almost emotionally dark as opposed to physically dark,
right,
because we don't see behind the ring, we don't really
right,
see into that darkness. Right. Was there a particular purpose that you were trying to accomplish there, or was it that you were focusing on the character?
No, I mean, there's a real specific purpose, which is that we can't see images of child exploitation. So the question is, how do you create the equivalent? And that's how I got the idea of watching the people who are left behind, right, so we can see those images, and to make that as troubling as what it would mean to see the actual images. Right. So we hear the stories of that, but we get the feeling of what that would mean through this alternate sort of kind of world. Now, whether or not that world could exist, I mean, that's a product of my imagination. I don't know if that exists, but it felt that was a way of accessing this notion of things being traded, things that are actually born out of, weirdly enough, a sense of that are taken wildly out of context. I think that what at the origin of watching the parents comes the need of this young woman who's held captive to see her mother, and a desire by the captor to please her and set up this kind of channel. But once he sees that, he realizes that it can be exploited, and it can be exploited in this horrific, dark way. We don't know how big this inner ring is, like within the pedophile ring proper, that there's this specific group that are watching the suffering of parents. It could be maybe 8 people, it could be, we don't know. Right. But the feeling of it, and there is this sense, and again, drawn from my experience of looking into the Cornwall inquiry, of what the allegations were and how extraordinary they were, but there was no way of proving it and knowing how far it went, and the sense of a conspiracy theories and things that are supposed to be protecting you being turned against you, the how it's flaunted, all those things began to work into the development. And as you said, when you say mythological, I think about it more in terms of this sort of dark fable, that it has a feeling of a dark fable.
Yeah. Well, I almost felt Hitchcockian in a way, because because the evil is unseen, it lends itself to be even darker in a way, because you can only imagine the horrors that they've gone through.
Right.
And I love that fact.
Yeah. Well, I do think that's true, and I think in this case it's born out of necessity because,
of course.
You can't show this image, and ultimately it's also born out of this. When I was doing the research and I was talking to these extraordinary detectives who work in child exploitation, who are doing this heroic sort of work because it's really tough. I mean, it's very, very taxing on you emotionally to be subjected to these images and see children getting older through these images. But they are hampered in some ways because unlike other undercover operations where you can actually, trade drugs or you can trade, money, they can't trade those images. And they can't bring children into their work, and they can't even bring images of children into their work. So it makes you wonder, well, how can they actually penetrate these rings otherwise? Because the first requirement is that you bring in children. So it's a really dark world, and I just felt that. I knew what the restrictions were, but sometimes those restrictions, make you have to take other, creative directions and choices.
Right. Well, and speaking about the cast, otherwise, I mean, what were your choices like here? I mean, it sounds like you actually wrote one part for a specific actor.
Right.
Why did you pick the people that you ended up with?
Well, I had the good fortune to work with many of them. I mean, some of them, many years ago, I produced a film early in Ryan's career called Foolproof, and so I just knew of Ryan, and I always felt him so appealing and so empathetic, and so has such an amazing range, and so I always wanted to work with him again as a director. Scott Speedman I'd work with, and Murray Enos and Kevin Durant I had just worked with in Devil's Knot, and they both blew me away. Like I just thought, like they had such amazing range, and so I was inspired by those two. And Rosario, I just knew about her kind of her social work, and in issues of violence against women. And so I thought that she would be attracted to this role because she gets to play kind of a public figurehead, and so it's not so different from her own life, and she's so attractive, and yet she comes, she knows the darkness of that sort of space. So I felt. No, it was a dream cast, and fortunately they all said yes.
That's amazing. Well, otherwise, can you talk a little bit about filming? Because I understand you went through some rigors of going up to Sudbury to film in the extreme cold.
Yeah, I'd never been in that sort of, the first day that we did the location scout, I just thought that I can't work outside in these sort of circumstances. It's so painful when it's that cold, but you just get equipped. You just sort of like. I was especially watching people who are working with the camera and whose fingers are exposed, but they have like now these gloves that can be heated, and people just accommodate it.
Well,
but the first shock is just that this is, but it looks amazing, and so it's worth the.
It really lends itself to the bleakness. But I understand you had to wrap the cameras in like heating blankets and coats. And
no, you just have to do
amazing.
all that stuff. But first and foremost, you have to wrap yourself, and you have to just make sure that. And it's tough for the actors, right? Because they in those moments, when the blankets are taken away, they are exposed, and they have to perform these really hard scenes, but it was funny because the film before I was shooting in plus 40 in Georgia at the height of summer, and that was also very extreme, and but the cold is more physically painful because there's a very real sense of frostbite. Like at a certain point, you can't have your skin exposed to that sort of temperature. Wow. But it was really amazing staging like this car chase over 3 days in the cold, and seeing the stunt people, and everyone is kind of geared up. That's what it's all about, gear.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, thank you very much. A pleasure.
Thanks. Okay.
Thank you.